Good afternoon and welcome to another exciting adventure of For the Glory of God and Kings, reading the Bible for the first time again. This is Travis Finley, or Trucking Theologian, on Tumblr, and I have been thinking more and more about what I have previously posted in terms of reading the Bible and becoming acquainted with the language the Bible uses. The original language that the Old Testament was written in was both Hebrew primarily and then Aramaic in certain portions in the prophets. And then the New Testament was written exclusively in English, in Greek. So those languages are easy to recognize because that's the way the original texts come to us. But what I'm talking about in these episodes is another language that transcends the Hebrew, the Aramaic, and the Greek, and that is the language of symbolism. That is the language of figure and type. And I think that just hearing this over and over again might make something click along the way. But one of my friends that I was corresponding with about this, there's a disconnect, and I'm trying to figure out how to address that. So this is the way I heard one Bible teacher put it, and it makes sense to me, so I'm going to throw it at you and see what happens. If we think of the Bible as a symphony, and the beginning of the Bible introduces us to a pattern of music that the rest of the symphony is going to embellish and develop and deconstruct and echo and repeat. So this Bible teacher that I'm thinking of uses Beethoven's Fifth as his example. So Beethoven's Fifth starts out bum 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 ba da 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 da, something like that. What he says is that pattern of music is used throughout the rest of the symphony, and it is changed, it's modified, it goes up, it goes down, it goes backwards, it goes upside down, it gets dislocated and broken down and then put back together again. I don't know, that makes sense to me. But that's what I'm talking about when we're reading the Bible. We see these patterns and these echoes and these allusions, which we talked about last night on the live broadcast. So I thought that I would do something today that isn't too heavy, and I think that makes the point that I'm trying to make as well. So if we think about the announcement of Jesus' birth, we are told that his name will be called Emmanuel, because he will save his people from their sins. So Jesus' name isn't Emmanuel. Nobody calls him Emmanuel. When he was a kid, no one said, "Sup, Manuel?" And he'd say, "No, my name's Jesus, okay? Jesus. Don't call me Emmanuel, it's not my name." That's not what happened. So then what's going on? Emmanuel in the original language means God with us. God with us. And so that right there is figure. That right there is symbolism. If Jesus is Emmanuel, somehow we're talking about Jesus being God with us. So how is Jesus God with us? That's interpretation, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. So the question becomes, where did Matthew get his idea for quoting or using this idea that Emmanuel is encapsulated and represented in Jesus? And we are familiar enough with the Bible story that we know that Matthew says that Jesus is the fulfillment of an expectation that we find in the book of Isaiah 7:14, to be sure. And there we see that Isaiah uses that idea as well, that there is Emmanuel. But then the question becomes, where did Isaiah get his idea? God with us, Emmanuel. I would like to suggest that along the lines of Beethoven's Fifth, that this Emmanuel refrain, as far as I can tell, begins back in Genesis chapter 12. I call it the Emmanuel principle, but we could very well call it the Abrahamic promise principle. In Genesis chapter 12, we read that God is calling Abram out of his homeland, and he's directing him to move his family into the land of Canaan. And in that call, God says to Abram, I will be your God, and I will bless you. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. That is the Emmanuel principle. That is what it means to have God with you. God is on your side. When you go into battle, you want Yahweh on your side, not fighting against you. So that is the Emmanuel principle, begun in Genesis chapter 12. So that refrain that we see later on, and if this were a longer episode, we could look in historical situations, primarily in the book of Deuteronomy, where we see God coming to fight for his people. And whenever that comes up, I'm writing down in my margin, IP, Emmanuel principle, again and again and again and again. So we see it repeated over and over and over again. That's the symbolic language that I'm talking about, because Matthew doesn't explain what he means by Emmanuel principle. Isaiah doesn't explain what he means by Emmanuel principle. So then when we interpret what the language says, that is the other principle that I'm talking about, where translation is different than interpretation. When we translate the Greek into English, we see that we read, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. That's what it says, but what does it mean? I'm arguing that the refrain of Emmanuel finds its beginning back in the call of Abram to follow God and have God on his side throughout his whole life. And then everyone else after that continues that promise and promulgation of God's presence with those who follow the one true and living God. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. It's not this idea that there's some secret that we're looking for and we can just make up whatever we want. That's not what I'm arguing for. I'm arguing for the Bible's music that we hear in one place, we hear it echoed in another place, and we hear that that presentation over and over again, and sometimes it's a longer presentation, sometimes it's a shorter presentation, sometimes it's a higher octave, sometimes it's a lower octave. That makes sense to me. So hopefully that can maybe make sense to you, and if it does, great. Give me a thumbs up, post a comment, subscribe so that I can see that you guys are interested in this. But I'd really like to hear your thoughts and any questions. If there's any clarification I can make, I would love to do that for you. So until next time, this is Travis with For the Glory of God and Kings, reading the Bible for the first time again. For the first time again.